1956. A small Middle Eastern country dared to face three world powers: Britain, France, and Israel. The country was Egypt. The leader was Gamal Abdel Nasser. The moment was the Suez Crisis. That was Egypt's first stand on the global stage. But what came after was years of defeat, shame, and collapse. For decades, the Egyptian army was mocked as outdated and weak. Yet in 2025, something unbelievable is happening. Egypt is flying Rafale fighter jets, launching submarines, and preparing to operate aircraft carriers. Generations who once carried the pain of the 1967 defeat are now watching their children raise the flag with new pride. Can a country buried under debt and ruled by dictatorship really rise again to shock the world? Picture this, standing by the Nile River in 2025. As the thunder of French jets shakes the skies above Cairo. This is not about pyramids. This is about power. In the next few minutes, you'll uncover the hidden reason behind Egypt's shocking military comeback. In the 1950s, one man stood up and gave Egypt a voice. His name was Gamal Abdel Nasser. He promised a new Egypt, strong, proud, and free from foreign rule. The world first saw this power in 1956. That year, Britain, France, and Israel tried to take control of the Suez Canal. But Nasser did not bow down. He fought back. And in the end, the old empires were forced to retreat. For Egyptians, it was a moment of glory. They believed Nasser had made Egypt a leader of the Arab world. But just 11 years later, everything collapsed. In 1967, war broke out with Israel. It lasted only 6 days. Egypt's air force was destroyed on the ground. Its army broke apart. Cities were lost. What began as pride turned into disaster. For ordinary Egyptians, it was not just a defeat. It was humiliation that burned for generations. The man once called the Lion of the Arabs was gone, and one question remained. Could Egypt ever rise again, or was its power lost forever? In 1973, Egypt tried to rise again. Its army crossed the Suez Canal during the Yom Kippur War. For a moment, the nation felt victory in its hands, but that victory did not last. Soon after, Egypt made peace with Israel, and with peace came something new: dependence. Year after year, billions of dollars flowed in from the United States. American tanks, American jets, American weapons. Egypt's army looked strong on the outside. Parades showed off shiny new machines. But inside, there was no independence. It was like a poor neighbor living on rich gifts. He may look wealthy, but he owns nothing himself. The generals knew how to march, but not how to build. The soldiers carried guns, but not the spirit of victory. By the 1980s and 1990s, Egypt's military was one of the largest in the Middle East. But it was a giant with weak legs, power without dignity, strength without freedom. And for the Egyptian people, the question grew louder. When will Egypt stop begging and start leading again? The year was 2014. After years of protests, revolutions, and chaos, a new man rose to power. His name was Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. He looked into the cameras and told Egyptians, "I will build a new Egypt, a nation that was modern, a nation that was strong, a nation that could stand tall again." For ordinary Egyptians, this promise was not just politics. It was a cry for respect. They were tired of humiliation, tired of being ignored, tired of watching their army look big, but act weak. Sisi made a gamble. If Egypt wanted respect, it needed more than speeches. It needed weapons. It needed factories. It needed allies. But there was one problem. Egypt was drowning in debt. So where would the money come from? Where would the power to modernize the army appear? Egypt's people watched closely. Would Sisi be another leader full of promises? Or would he truly rebuild the strength of a nation once called the heart of the Arab world? Sisi had made his choice. If Egypt was going to rise again, it needed power, and fast. So he went shopping. From France, he bought Rafale jets, sleek machines that roared across the desert sky. From Germany, he ordered submarines, silent hunters that could prowl the seas. From Russia, he took S-300 VM air defenses, strong shields against enemy aircraft. And from China, he added Wing-Lung drones, sharp eyes in the sky for modern war. But the biggest surprise came from France again. 2 massive Mistral-class carriers, ships so large they were like floating cities. Each one could carry troops, tanks, and helicopters. These carriers were never meant for Egypt. They were first built for Russia. But after sanctions blocked delivery, France needed a buyer. Egypt stepped in, and overnight its navy had one of the most powerful tools in the region. The message was clear. Egypt was no longer begging for weapons. It was building an arsenal. But one question still remained. Buying weapons is easy. Using them is the real test. Buying weapons was one step, but training to use them was another. So Egypt turned to its allies. With Russia, it held joint drills, testing tanks and air power in the desert. With France, it trained with naval ships, learning how to fight at sea. With the UAE, it practiced airstrikes and desert combat. With Greece, it drilled over the Mediterranean, showing power to Europe. Even with Sudan, it joined exercises along the Nile. For the first time in decades, Egypt's army moved like a real force. Soldiers gained confidence. Pride returned to their uniforms. This was no longer an army of parades. It was an army ready for war. Then came the twist. Egypt wasn't just buying weapons anymore. It began building its own. Tanks, armored vehicles, and even drones rolled out of local factories. The dream of independence was slowly becoming real. But one question still hung in the air. Who was Egypt really preparing to fight? The new weapons and training were not for show. The threats were real. In Libya, Egypt drew a red line. It warned Turkey-backed forces not to cross into its borderlands. In Ethiopia, a bigger danger rose. The Nile, Egypt's lifeline, was threatened by the giant dam. If the water slowed, Egypt's fields could turn to dust. Then came the Red Sea. Here, Egypt's navy stood guard. It protected vital trade routes where billions in goods passed each year. Every frontier became a test. For ordinary Egyptians, this was not about pride anymore. It was about pure survival. The army was no longer a symbol. It was their shield against collapse. But inside the palace, one truth remained. Egypt was still broke. The economy could not fund such massive weapons and drills. Someone else was paying the bills. The question was who? And why would they invest so much in Egypt's rise? The hidden answer was not in Cairo. It was in the Gulf. From Saudi Arabia and the UAE, billions of dollars poured into Egypt. It came as aid, as loans, as giant investments. Every new fighter jet. This was not charity, it was a partnership. The monarchies had wealth, but not manpower. Egypt had millions of soldiers, but not enough cash. Together, they built a silent bargain. The Gulf would pay. Egypt would provide the muscle. In Yemen, Egyptian officers helped guide the Gulf War effort. In the Red Sea, Egyptian ships patrolled vital oil routes. Even inside Africa, Egypt's growing power gave the Gulf a longer reach. For ordinary Egyptians, this was a double-edged sword. The money kept the army alive, but the dependence returned. A new chain, only with a different master. Still, the dream of a strong Egypt pushed forward. For many, it felt like pride had finally returned. But inside the markets, one question kept rising. Could Egypt's fragile economy survive this comeback? Or was the military rise built on sand? On the outside, Egypt looked strong, but inside the truth was fragile. The economy was drowning in debt. Prices kept climbing. Inflation was crushing families. At the same time, human rights abuses stained Egypt's image. Journalists were silenced. Prisons were filled. Voices of dissent were erased. And then came the military problem. Egypt bought weapons from America, Russia, France, and China. Different systems, different languages, different repairs. It was a logistical nightmare. One jet needed French parts. One tank needed Russian engines. One missile needed Chinese software. It was power on paper, but chaos in practice. Yet the biggest weakness was money. Without Saudi and UAE support, Egypt could not pay the bills. The new army was built on outside cash, not inner strength. For every weapon Egypt showed, there was a hidden loan behind it. The cracks were there. Behind the parades, behind the jets over Cairo, stood the risk of sudden collapse. And that raised a bigger question. If Egypt's rise was so fragile, what did this mean for the whole world in 2025? Egypt has risen again, but at a heavy cost. The true secret is now clear. This comeback was not built on pyramids of stone, but on pyramids of foreign money. Power without true economic strength is always fragile. Yes, Egyptians feel pride again, but the real question is, for how long? Once mocked as outdated, Egypt now shocks global powers with its new strength. Yet behind the jets and tanks, the weakness still remains. So we must ask, will Egypt's rise last? Or is it only another chapter before decline? Egypt's comeback proves that nations can fall and then rise again. But history shows us something deeper. True strength does not come from shiny weapons or borrowed money. It comes from stability, from economy, and from the trust of a people. Egypt has shocked the world with its return, yet its future still hangs in the balance. For now, the flag of the pharaohs flies high once more. But the real test is still to come. Subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden military shifts shaping tomorrow's world. Do you think Egypt's rise will last or fade again?